want to thank the congregation for the invitation today to be here. This is a wonderful group of people at Fairview, and I've got so many connections here with this congregation, and one thing in particular that is directly tied with the Northview congregation in Columbia, of course, is that Clay and Raylyn Henson and their family are here at Fairview, and what a blessing I know that they are to all of you here at Fairview, and we miss them so much. Clay, sure you won't reconsider coming back? I know that's not going to happen, but I know that they love all of you here at Fairview beyond the shadow of a doubt. I know what a blessing they are to you here. And of course, Brandon Greaves and I are tied forever to so many different degrees and so many different levels, because I am from Portland, Tennessee. Brandon Greaves is from Portland, Tennessee. Now,
here's what's interesting about the fact that we're from the same hometown. I graduated high school in 1996. Brandon, you graduated in 2000, correct? Okay, which means that when I graduated high school, I graduated on June 1st, 1996. That means that fall, he was starting as a freshman. And so our paths never crossed in Portland, Tennessee. We had never met each other. When Clay and Raylyn came down and I found out that they wound up here at Fairview, they said, you know, the preacher is from Portland. I thought, what? How's that possible? Who is this cat? And I don't know him. Well, Brandon Greaves. Well, then that started our relationship, and I remember reaching out to him one day. I think I called him on the phone, and then we got to talking, and we had so many different connections, and I got to hear about his story and about how he became a Christian, and then he went to preaching school and all of that. And so it was a wonderful story. I was so glad that our paths finally crossed, and then I know that he spoke recently on our summer series at Northview. And then Jonathan Burns is here today, preacher at East Hill. I'm so thankful for him as well. And I know that we're planning on coming down for the gospel meeting with Phil Sanders coming to East Hill this next week. And so we're looking forward to that. Actually, Jonathan's dad and I were on the board at Short Mountain Bible Camp for a while together. And, of course, I know Jonathan's now on the executive board. And so our paths crossed a number of years back. And what a blessing it is to be here in Pulaski, Tennessee today. This is a wonderful congregation. I was excited when I heard about this event. And so it was funny. Our group was at CYC, and I know that Chris's group from Morrison was at CYC as well. And I got talking about the speakers, and I think I mentioned something about Reed Swindle's lesson. He said, well, you know, I had to miss that one. He said, my wife sent me out for some Starbucks coffee. And he said, you know how long those lines can be. And I thought, well, you know, he missed a big one, because it was huge. If you remember being there for Reed's lesson, that's kind of an inside story. But I know what a wonderful blessing that event is, and I know some of you were able to go to that. But I'm indeed glad to be here today. I kind of know what my timetable is with how long we can go. So if you'll indulge me for just a moment, I appreciate Chris's lesson so much as we stop and consider what it means truly to make those godly choices. As we do understand, there are so many ungodly choices that we can make in this world. And he's exactly right. There are consequences to everything. I appreciate what he brought out concerning that, because a lot of people think about the term consequences from just a negative standpoint. But a consequence is something that's going to happen regardless. It can be good or it can be bad. And so I appreciate him bringing that out very much this morning. And it's funny, him talking about him being a literature teacher. I actually want to start with a poem this morning. It was funny, you were asking who loves poetry. There once was a king who did an unkingly thing. He did not go to battle with his men in the spring. One night when waking, he rose from his bed, deciding he'd stroll across his roof instead. While walking, he noticed a sight to behold, not knowing results of what soon would unfold. His eyes became fixed on a down below path. The pretty Bathsheba was taking a bath. The Bible describes how the king then inquired to find out the name of the one he desired. Something simply innocent, perhaps, led to a series of sinful mishaps. Now, probably most everybody in the room this morning can tell me exactly what story from the Bible that is. You recognize that it's the story of David and Bathsheba. And as you think about the events that unfolded, as we have recorded for us in 2 Samuel, thinking about how that rocked the king's world to so many different degrees and levels in regards to his spiritual walk with God and what unfolded in that text. We know that because of what David did and having that unlawful sexual relationship with Bathsheba, and that she became pregnant, they conceived and they were with child. And as David is trying to deceive Bathsheba's husband Uriah the Hittite, who was one of his mighty men, trying to get him to have sexual relations with his wife so that they could make it look like once he found out she was pregnant, that it would be through him. Well, David was trying every which way to make that happen, and he was unsuccessful. And when he was unsuccessful at these attempts, then we know that he eventually turned to putting Uriah in the front lines of the battle and for having their men to withdraw so that Uriah would be killed. And then David wouldn't have to worry about anything. But of course, when Nathan the prophet confronts King David for his sin, and he says, "Thou art the man," David knows that these things have not been hidden any longer. And we ultimately know that these things were not hidden from God. God knew these things all along. And you might be wondering, why in the world am I bringing up the story of David and Bathsheba? I want to shift for just a moment to think about one of the things that we can understand about this text. David got in trouble with what his eyes saw while he was walking around on his roof that evening. Now, we understand that in today's time, we live in an age where it is so easy to see things. Yes, you can see things out in the world from a physical perspective, but in the world of technology, we live in an age where it is so readily available for us to see things. I have been assigned the topic, how to stay pure in the world of technology. And as you understand that there have been so many technological advancements over the years, and if you think about how far we've come since the creation of the world and how many things have been developed, how many things have been refined, we've got access to so many things just like that, as quick as you can think of it. You can type it in or you can say it and have it come before you. One of the things that we need to remember is that with these technological advancements come greater responsibilities and come greater dangers for what all is at our disposal and at our access. And when you think about, yes, we can still see things out in the world from a physical perspective with our own eyes, we know that we have so many temptations that can come at us in the form of technology, with the things that have been developed. And so that's what I want us to talk about for a little while this morning as we talk about all the different ways that we need to remember to stay pure when it comes to technology. And as I can think of, and I know a lot of the other adults in the room, you know, I can remember the days before I had any real kind of technology from a phone or a computer perspective. My mind goes back to what Chris was talking about with playing Super Mario Brothers. Yeah, I had the old Nintendo system, and that was one of the earliest forms of technology that I had access to from an entertainment perspective and a gaming perspective. And then as I got on up into high school, you know, I remember us having a computer, and I had friends who had phones. I didn't have a phone yet. In fact, I didn't have a cell phone till I was probably about 22 years old. When I had moved down to Columbia, I had left Portland, I'd graduated college, and I was out on my own. I did not have a phone until then, and some of you young people are saying, that just seems like a travesty to you. But that's the way that it was when I was growing up. These smartphones were not available then like you think of in today's time. And you think about all the different advancements in technology. I had a graphic up on the screen one day when I was preaching. Actually, it was in a Bible class, in auditorium class on a Wednesday night. And I was showing the different ways that cell phones have advanced. Some of you adults will remember bag phones, the old Motorola analog bag phones. And if you've ever seen a picture of one of these, most of the young people probably have never seen one in person. But you think about how archaic that sounds to today's time frame when we've got smartphones that are so readily available. And then, of course, you had the flip phones, and some of those phones you'd have to pull the antennas out on. I remember I used to work at a cell phone place, and there were some people who would come in, and they'd say, I want one of them Star Trek digital phones. First of all, they didn't even know how to say digital. A lot of people said digital. It wasn't digital, it was digital. And then, number two, it wasn't a Star Trek phone. It was a Motorola StarTAC, T-A-C. And so they had to get their terminology right. They were trying to get into this newfound technology. They were used to the old school stuff, and they didn't really know how to say it. But we've made a lot of technological advancements since then. You know, there are iPads, there are smartphones. And you think about, even just from a technological perspective, I grew up having one of those bigger TVs, those big box set TVs, and they've got all these flat screens that are out now. So technology has come a long, long way. But with all the advancements in technology come greater temptations, more access to temptations. As we work our way through this this morning, I want to begin with some statistics that we might think of. Some of you in here might know Chad Landman. Chad is the educational director for the Graymere Church of Christ in Columbia. And one of the things that Chad is known for is conducting digital parenting seminars, where he talks to people in the church about the dangers of technology and social media and things that we need to be aware of with our kids especially. And so I wanted to bring out some of these statistics today that he brings up. And some of these are quite alarming. He said technically there are like 986 million websites, sites on the internet. Now that's not pages within those sites, that's just websites themselves. And so you know that there are a lot more things that you can go to than just those 986 million sites. And he said to show you what the number is of how many of those are sex-related sites, 55,337 of them are sexual-related sites. And here's a more alarming statistic when we're talking about the idea of purity. 1 in 5 searches on mobile phones were pornographic in nature. And this one's really alarming to me. The average age of first-time pornography users is 8 years old. 90% of children have viewed pornography online. And he said in his lecture, most while doing homework. And I remember Chad vividly saying, you can understand why they would do it while they were doing homework. Because most of the time they're not being supervised by their parents. Most of the time parents will say, go do your homework. And they're unsupervised. And so these were some alarming statistics. He even says 89% of sexual solicitations are done through chat apps. Now, I'm not somebody who does a lot with chat apps. I've got access to Facebook Messenger. That's about the only one that I use. And, of course, most of that is ministry related, and then catching up with some friends that I keep touch with at various locations. I know nothing about Snapchat. All I know is that Chad Landman says don't use Snapchat because he said your information is not private. It is compromised time and time again. He said, my kids will never use Snapchat. Well, my kids know that I don't use Snapchat. Well, in one sense anyway, because my version of Snapchat, Chris, is, hey, let's talk. So I'm not very technologically advanced when it comes to those things, but let's be assured that there are many dangers out there when we talk about our purity, and especially from the standpoint of being sexually pure. There are a lot of dangers out there from a technological perspective that we need to be guarded against. We need to watch out for, because the devil is really going to try very hard to get us to falter and to get us to do things from a sexual perspective that God doesn't want us involved in. So we've always got to be careful. I want you to turn your Bibles to Matthew chapter 6. As we get into this lesson, there are some concepts that are brought out in the Bible that I think are worth mentioning for us today, which we need to take note of and help us in our daily Christian walk as we're striving to be better, obedient children of God each and every day. In Matthew chapter 6, Jesus is talking about the things that we see. You know, God created us with eyes. And He created us to see and experience the world around us, but that doesn't always mean that the things that we look at are going to be good. He says in verses 22 and 23 of Matthew chapter 6, the lamp of the body is the eye. And if you notice what he says, if therefore your eye is clear, then your whole body will be full of light. But he goes on to say, but if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. And he says, if therefore the light that is in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? Our eyes have the capability of seeing so many things, but the things that we see are the things that we let into our bodies. And as we think about how there is supposed to be a body full of light, if we're continually letting in things of darkness, it's going to continue to darken the people that we are. And we're not to be people of the darkness, we're to be people of light. And so we understand that our eyes can see good things, but our eyes can see bad things. One of the other scriptures that comes to mind is going back to the story of Job in the Old Testament. And you think about how Job's so-called 3 friends were accusing him of doing something bad enough to deserve this punishment from God. You remember that Job lost his family, he lost his possessions, he lost his health. And as they're accusing him of all these things, he says in chapter 31 in verse 1, I have made a covenant with my eyes. And he says, how then could I look upon or gaze upon a virgin? Think about Job's situation. He was a married man. He had no business looking upon another woman in a lustful manner because his eyes are supposed to be for his wife. And so again, you've got an aspect of purity there, not just what we see, but when Job is talking about making a covenant with his eyes, this is something you need to make up your mind ahead of time. And this is something that you need to think about, because we're going to be faced with situations each and every day. Whether it is a physical person of the opposite sex that we're going to look upon in a lustful manner, or whether it's images on the computer or on our smartphones or on movies and things of that nature that we're going to be tempted to look at. We need to remember that we need to make a covenant with our eyes ahead of time before we get into certain situations, knowing what we should and what we shouldn't do. In 1 John chapter 2 and verse 16, we have a text here that some of you remember. Willard Collins, who was the former president of Lipscomb College. He used to talk about this as the 3 bullets of Satan, and ways that Satan tempts us and comes after us. And as you take note of what John says in that text about the things that are not from the Father but from the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life. He says these things are not from the Father, these things are from the world. And we need to remember that the devil is going to use these things, even as he did with Eve in the Garden of Eden, way back in the beginning in Genesis chapter 3. He's going to use these things to come after us. And so we need to understand the lust of the eyes is going to be one of those things that Satan uses to try to get at us. And that he knows if he can continue to pump that darkness into ourselves, then he's going to be working hard of winning his battle, of trying to pull us away from God and trying to make us impure individuals. And then, of course, as James talks about in chapter 1 in verses 14 and 15, we talk about the process of how sin develops. Because James talks about how each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. And as you that is conveyed there in James chapter 1, you see how that process continues with what he talks about. And as you see, of course, some of the terminology here, when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death. Spiritual death is the ending goal in mind of what Satan wants to happen with us. But we need to understand we need to stay away from that. But we need to know how the temptation process works. And the things that we're drawn away and enticed by are the visual lusts that we have, the things that we see with our eyes. And especially when you're talking about the avenue of temptation in these technology times, that's going to be something that we need to think about. I want to address just for a few moments as we move toward the end here why Satan is so effective. Why is Satan so good at what he does? And when it comes to technology and the things that we could see on our smartphones, the things that we can see on our computers, and the list goes on and on and on. Why is Satan so effective at using that against us? Well, one of the things that Satan likes for us to do is to justify our actions. Satan can get you to think, oh, it's really not that bad. It was just a harmless glance. Maybe there was an ad that popped up on your computer that was something that you shouldn't have seen, and he'll get you to think, oh, it's just an advertisement. Don't worry about it. Or you didn't look too long. You looked a little while, but you didn't look too long. He tries to get us to justify our actions. Or he might even get us to say, well, I was really having a hard time dealing with something, so that's what I did to try to make it better. Satan will try to get you to justify your actions. Another thing that he'll get you to do is to linger. Here's a statement I want you to remember. When linger turns longer, temptation becomes stronger. I heard Bill McDonald say one time in a gospel meeting, going back to David and Bathsheba, he believes what really got David in trouble was the fact that if it had just been an innocent glimpse, fair enough, turn around and go the other way. he thinks David kept looking. And then you see where that lust grows, and then how the sin develops as a result of that. When your linger turns longer, temptation becomes stronger. The more you see something, the more desire you are going to have for that something. So Satan wants us to linger instead of turning around and going the other way. He might even talk you into the fact that, oh, it's not hurting anybody. Nobody else is getting hurt in this process. Wrong. You know who it is hurting? You. And as well as having an impact on your life for the rest of your life, it's hurting your spiritual walk with the Lord. And so don't ever let Satan try to tell you that it's not hurting anybody, that you're viewing things that you have no business viewing. We need to stay away from these things. Also, I put the scriptures up here, and you'll think that that sounds odd. How will Satan use that? Satan wants you to not be able to use the scriptures. Young people, listen to me. This is very important. We need to be diligent Bible students, okay? Not just a verse or two here and there. We need to be able to know our Bibles, because do you remember how Jesus combated the temptations of the devil in the wilderness? What did he use? He used scriptures. That's exactly right. That's what we need to use against the devil. And if we don't know the scriptures, we can't use the scriptures. Now, granted, we're not going to be able to quote it most likely from, as Marshall Keeble you say, from kiver to kiver. But we need to be acquainted with the things that are in this book so that we can use it against the devil. Satan is very effective in these areas as he tries to get us to sin. And the last thing that I want to bring up is, how can we avoid all of this temptation that's available through all this technology in the world today? Number one, we can get rid of what's causing us to sin, right? Open your Bibles to Matthew chapter 18. Matthew chapter 18, you might remember this particular text when Jesus is talking about the idea of stumbling blocks. You look down in verses 7 through 9 and you see what Jesus says. Woe to the world because of its stumbling blocks, for it is inevitable that stumbling blocks come, but woe to that man through whom the stumbling block comes. And if your hand or your foot causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it from you. It is better for you to enter life crippled or lame than having 2 hands or 2 feet to be cast into the eternal fire. And if your eye causes you to stumble, pluck it out and throw it from you. It is better for you to enter life with 1 eye than having 2 eyes, to be cast into the fiery hell. We know that probably on most situations, Jesus is not necessarily talking about doing this literally, but what Jesus is saying is that if there is something that is causing you to stumble in life, you need to fix the problem. And let me even be a little extreme here. I've known people who have had trouble viewing pornography on smartphones. One of the things that people can do to be able to practice what Jesus is talking about here is to get rid of your smartphone. And some of you are going to look at me like I'm crazy. Listen, smartphones can cause us to be pretty dumb sometimes. And if you've got a smartphone, and if you're viewing things on that smartphone where you've got that instant access, listen to me. There's no harm in getting rid of what's causing you to sin and go back to like a flip phone or a phone that doesn't have internet access. Young people, it's not worth your soul. Okay? We need to remember how important it is. If we've got a problem and we're having trouble dealing with it, we might have to remove the source. And so keep that in mind. If there ever comes a point where you're having trouble dealing with a particular situation where you're sinning with your eyes and looking at things, do whatever it takes to get rid of that. Maybe there's a time you could go back to it later, but you've got to be able to deal with the situation then, before it gets too late. So we need to get rid of things. Sometimes there are phone apps and even computer programs. I know there is one program called Covenant Eyes, which goes back to Job 31, as a way for people to put programs on their phones and on their computers to be blocks and filters so that you can't visit the sites that have pornographic images and things of that nature on them. And so these might be some ways that we can avoid. One of the things that's big with people who are really struggling with this and who are addicted to pornography, counselors will tell them to have an accountability partner. What is it that James tells us? Confess your sins one to another. If we've got an accountability partner, we can have somebody that we trust that we can say, look, here's where I'm struggling. Here's where I have messed up. And don't just rely on your own strength or power, because you know that's what the devil loves for you to do, to think that you can do it on your own. You can't do it without God and His Son, Jesus Christ. And sometimes you even need an accountability partner to be able to do what James talks about there. So there are ways that we can avoid these aspects of temptation and technology times. How hard it is to stay pure in the world of technology because of all of the different temptations that the devil puts around us. And you don't think that's a playground for him? You don't think that each and every day when someone goes to visit one of these sites, whether it's on purpose or whether it's accidental, that the devil's going to try to find a way to pull you in, hook, line, and sinker? He most assuredly is. And we need to understand how important it is to stay pure in the world of technology. Back in 1990, that's really when the World Wide Web, as the internet basically as we know it, there were some things that existed before that, but that's really when the internet was revolutionized as we know it. And people were able to search for just about anything online that they wanted. And you see how that has continued even to this day, even to the nth degree. But brethren, I'm here to tell you that with all of these advancements come so many more ample opportunities for the devil to work his magic. Let's always be the kind of people who can make a stand against the temptations that come in the form of technology. And let's make sure that we can stay pure in the world of technology. I know we'll probably have a song here in just a moment, but I want to have a special prayer at this time for all of the different ways that the devil tries to get us to stay away from purity when it comes to technology. Let's bow. Our Father in heaven, we humbly come before your throne. We praise your high and holy name. And we ask a special measure of protection on all of us as we're in the age of technology. And we know that you want us to remain pure, and we have to fight even harder today with all of the available devices that we have in order to do that, Father. And so we ask a special measure of protection this very day on all of our young people and all of our adults as well, because our adults can be so tempted with these avenues as well. Help us all as we strive to be the type of people even that Jesus talked about himself, for I always do the things that are pleasing to you. Help us to do that.